There are a set of related questions which can be summarized by the single phrasing of, is the world real? How do I know that the world is, in fact, real? How do I know there is a mind-independent reality, external to the self? There are a number of questions which effectively collapse to this one. One of these questions is the question of solipsism, such as, how do I know that I'm not imagining all of this? So, my first response to these questions, this cluster of questions, is to attack this one, which I see as the most egregious, the one most deserving of attack. So how do I know that I'm not imagining all of this? When I look around, I see a world which is almost infinitely and infinitesimally complex. I can look at things with a $20 microscope that plugs into the USB port on my computer, and I can see them at 1,000 times magnification. There's a huge degree of accuracy and consistency in these things, and this world seems to be filled with billions of other beings, countless conscious beings, including the sentient ones that we call humans, Homo sapiens, who are capable of doing all kinds of things, such as teaching me physics or beating me at chess. People who seem to know all kinds of things, telling me about their lives in ways that can be novel and surprising to me. It seems that all of these people can provide information that I do not currently have available to myself. And so this seems to prove that if I am in fact imagining all of this, then the me which is doing the imagining is not the me that I imagine myself to be, this limited being named Tobias Nash with a physical brain that takes up something like a 10-centimeter radius sphere in physical space. There's a maximum amount of complexity or information that could be contained within that physical region. So if I am imagining all of this, all of those things which are external to myself, I'm also imagining all of the things internal, not only to myself, but to everybody else. So how do I know that the me which is imagining my life is not also imagining everybody else's simultaneously? What makes me think that the character I think I am in this video game that I, this greater version of myself, am imagining? How do I know that this character that I have identified myself with is not simply one amongst countless NPCs? So my argument is that solipsism collapses to the simulation hypothesis. So I think we could deal with solipsism almost immediately and dismiss that as a possibility. And in fact, if it is true, then it's something almost humbling rather than something self-aggrandizing. It may seem tempting at first to think that I am the most real thing, but if I am imagining this, I'm imagining everybody, and it becomes similar to the idea that as you wake up each day, you could be a completely different person, waking up complete with their memories, and perhaps your dreams are the life that you had before, or perhaps you die and you're reborn as somebody else, and there's only a single soul traveling through all our lives in a non-linear fashion, such that you could be reborn in the 13th century, and only once you have traveled through all possible lives and experienced all possible experiences in the finite set of human lives that seem to exist throughout space-time, given there's a finite age for the planet and the universe itself. Perhaps then, once you've experienced all those things, then you're finished and you're free. But there could just be one person. So the idea that you're imagining all of this is not as narcissistic as it seems. If you are such a narcissist as to think that, then what you are in fact really thinking is that you are an NPC. I personally identify as an NPC. It seems like the most liberating idea rather than being a player. Because if you're a player, you're some super precious, special, extra-dimensional being coming in from outside this one. You're not from around here, you're a stranger if you're the main character. And I'd rather be an NPC, part of the system, than some spoiled brat running around playing the whole thing like a video game. Because if I'm an NPC, I'm not this one character, I am in fact the game. The infinitely complex and awesome universe itself, rather than a single fragment of it. That's who I'd really be. If I were an NPC, that would be the layer of consciousness or computation underlying my apparent self, so I would rather identify with that. So, moving on from this, we can look now at the simulation hypothesis, which is kind of what it effectively collapses to in some sense. How can I discount the possibility of this being simply a simulation? Well, you can't, is the short answer, but what does it matter is the longer answer. And this isn't simply to dismiss this question, this is to open the door to address the question with more precision, more nuance and subtlety than a yes or no answer. What exists between yes and no? Well, if we value yes as 1 and no as 0, then between these there are all of the other possible real numbers that exist between 0 and 1. Instead of a binary system, we have a real number system, such that we can value things in terms of percentage. We could say that one thing is relatively more real than another. For instance, the physical objects which I seem unable to modify without applying force. I can't simply think about these things and make them disappear. They seem to be more real than my imagined perceptions of the physical objects. and then the universe out there, it seems to be more real than myself. So the sense of relative reality, combined with that series of arguments about the relative complexity of the universe compared to my physical self, my brain, these seem to tell me that the world is more real than I am, and however real this simulation is, it seems to be a good one. So that's the value that we can get into it. But then you could say, how do you know it's even a simulation, anything as ordered as a simulation? What if it's not only an illusion, but a complete accidental one? What if the truth is what's referred to as the lawless universe hypothesis, that one moment does not precede or follow another, and there is no causal relationship between them. There are no laws of nature dictating how one moment turns into the next. Instead, what we have is a world where, much like the cars passing by on the outside road, things are entirely random, or seem to be that way. The cars are deterministic, but to me, their appearance seems to be a random, chaotic rate. What if the universe is like this? What if there is no conservation of information, preserving causality from one moment to the next, but everything is this complete random chance? And this one moment where I seem to be existing with all my memories of the life that I lived before and the complete causal history of the universe leading up to this point, these are all merely components of another random fluctuation, because it's a fundamental principle of mathematics that any sufficiently large random data set will contain within it arbitrarily large, apparently non-random data sets. For instance, if you take the number pi, which is transcendental, it cannot be described in any formula shorter than itself. There's no program shorter than pi that can tell you the whole of pi. You have to just keep calculating it digit by digit. It never repeats. It contains within it, even though it's the most random of structures, it contains within it every possible sequence that you can imagine. They had to change the iPod Shuffle algorithm, the iTunes Shuffle algorithm, because it was making things too random. It was doing random things, like playing several songs from the same album in sequence. This is the kind of stuff that people expect not to see in randomness. They don't want to see runs. This is how you can detect financial fraud and people who have made up numbers. They avoid having series like 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, or 2, 3, 6, 7, 9. These things are too close to the actual sequence. In randomness, you can even get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This can occur perfectly naturally. Randomness allows for all possibilities, including the apparently ordered, such that the changes that they had to make to the iTunes Shuffle algorithm constituted the imposition of non-random conditions upon it to make it seem more random to humans. So it's clear to me that psychologically humans do not understand randomness. So the random universe, the lawless universe hypothesis, seems like a perfectly possible one. But again, within this possibility, there's still a sense of comfort. It's a reassuring idea. It's not frightening. It's not threatening. It doesn't undermine my worldview. It's more like a worst-case scenario, a flaw as to how bad things could really be. I know that even if, in fact, there were a lawless universe with absolutely no principle of ordering it, any possible state could, in fact, occur within this lawless universe, including the one that I find myself in now, with all the apparent order and complexity and beauty from which I find meaning. If these things are entirely an accident, that doesn't take away from the fact that they fit within a causally consistent narrative. That narrative, even if it doesn't exist, is still derivable from the one moment that I seem to be bearing witness to right now. So, the answer is, in some sense, about these questions, don't worry about it, but it's not as simplistic as simply dismissing the questions. You can examine the questions clearly, and you can find that there is a depth of meaning that comes from moving beyond the binary explanation, moving beyond the obvious, and actually taking into account the available evidence and coming to probable conclusions rather than insisting on absolute proof. So this is once again a way of moving beyond nihilist. So that's my argument as to how we can know whether or not the world itself is real at all. The answer is, in effect, we can't. And in another sense, it doesn't matter. But then also, by investigating the question, we can find all kinds of illumination that comes from it.